What do you get when you combine a garden chair, a two-stroke engine, several meters of aluminium tubing, and two pairs of rotating blades? What you get is a rotorcraft for the masses. Hello and welcome back. I am Christopher Rex Emerson and I like to talk about planes a lot, but today's video is about a rotorcraft. Yes, we are finally beginning to cover rotorcraft on this channel. It has been highly requested for a long time. I have been wanting to get it for a long time, but this thing called procrastination does exist and other projects tend to get them sidelined, but I digress. Anyway, today we are talking about rotorcraft and my favorite rotorcraft of them all, which for people living outside the United States could be one that they haven't really heard of. And it's a little thing known as the Bensen B-8M. Now, if the B-8M looks like something that could have been cobbled together from stuff you bought at a local hardware store, well, that's exactly what it is. This was essentially a kit car in aerial form, a do-it-yourself rotorcraft aimed at the masses. And it's one of the reasons why it has always captivated me ever since I first discovered it in the back of a magazine about 10, 12 years ago. In the world of rotorcraft, the name Bensen, particularly in the United States, has been a household name for a long time. Russian-born engineer Igor Bensens was the main driving force that led to the huge proliferation of ultralight civil rotorcraft, specifically the autogyro, often known by its Bensen-assigned moniker of Gyrocopter. Now, although at first glance an autogyro might look very similar to a helicopter, it is in fact far more mechanically simple. No power at all is transmitted to the overhead rotor blades, they are free spinning. Instead, engine power is transmitted to a small propeller, usually in a pusher configuration, to provide forward momentum. As the craft moves forward, the air flowing over the rotor blades increases, causing them to rotate, which in turn generates lift. It was a concept first successfully developed by a Spanish engineer called Juan de la Cierva, someone who I will discuss in a future video on rotorcraft and autogyro specifically later on. But getting back to Bensen, his company's B-8M and its successors were the result of 20 years of gradual progress. Igor Bensens' parents fled the Russian Revolution and settled in Prague in the 1920s. He was sent to university in Belgium in 1934, and, displaying some natural talents, he was offered a scholarship to study mechanical engineering in the United States. After relocating to the US and completing his studies, Igor began working for General Electric. By this point, he'd already developed an interest in rotorcraft, and this was transformed into a true passion when he began working on things like the Kellett XR3 autogyro and the XR8 helicopter prototype. In the immediate years following the Second World War, his attention was drawn to lightweight gyrokites, which were unpowered rotorcraft designed to be towed behind a vehicle or a fast boat. He began working on his own designs, and after a stint working for Bensen Aircraft, he set up the Bensen Aircraft Corporation in 1953. The company's first designs included the Bensen Midjet, also known as the Midget Jet, and yes, those are ramjets installed on the rotor blade tips, you are not hallucinating. And then there was also the Bensen B4 Sky Scooter, described as an aerial bicycle for two. Yet no, as fascinating as that is, I do draw the line at getting inside something that looks a bit like Frankenstein's Vespa. Happily, the company stopped sniffing glue and also produced a few slightly more sensible things, like the B5 Gyroglider. From this, the company developed the B6. By this point, Igor Bensens had realized that there was a potentially huge market for lightweight or so-called civil sport or simply sporting aircraft in the United States. As such, the B6 was built with the same materials that you could find at any local hardware store. It really was as simple as it could be. It was a lawn chair bolted onto a simple tubular frame, 3 small wheels and wooden skids underneath, fixed pitch rotors above, and a simple handbar to tilt them for directional control. From the B6, they then moved on to develop the B7, and more crucially, the B-7M, the M standing for motorized. Powered by a 42 horsepower two-stroke engine, the B-7M could cruise at 60 miles an hour, and it had a range of approximately 120 miles. Though it was instantly popular, Bensen continued to refine the overall design, partly due to a crash of the B-7M prototype, and partly due to feedback on the self-assembly kits that he was trying to sell. Some people found that it was difficult to work with the round tubing that made up the bulk of the framework, so Bensen designed his next model, the B-8, with square section tubing instead. Like the B-7, the B-8 was initially produced as an unpowered gyrokite, and it was towed into the air for the first time in the middle of 1955. It was soon followed by a powered version, the B-8M, which flew for the first time near the end of the year on December the 6th. The B-8M was as light and as bare bones as it could safely be. On average, it had an empty weight of just 247 pounds, or about 112 kilograms. It was powered by a 72 horsepower McCulloch engine. Now, this was a four-cylinder, air-cooled, two-stroke, horizontally opposed engine that was originally developed to power target drones for the US Navy. It drove a 4-foot, two-blade fixed-pitch propeller which provided the forward thrust, and the free-spinning rotors had a diameter of 20 feet. It had a cruise speed of between 45 to 60 miles an hour, a maximum speed of around 85, and a range of 100 miles. The B-8M, soon marketed as the Gyrocopter, became an instant success. Bensen not only understood the importance of designing something that was simple and easy to manufacture, he also understood the importance of marketing. Adverts for the gyrocopter appeared in magazines such as Popular Science and Popular Mechanics, claiming you could build one in a couple of weekends with nothing more than ordinary tools. The gyrocopter was hailed as the new gateway for budding aviators. It was easy to build, its free-spinning rotors provided safe auto-rotation in the event of an engine failure, which meant that you could glide down to a safe and gentle landing, essentially using the free-spinning rotor blades like an impromptu parachute. But most importantly, it was cheap. You could buy plans for $30. You could purchase a full assembly kit from Bensen for as little as $900, and on average, in the 1960s, the full cost of buying and assembling a Bensen B-8M was only around $2,000. Adjusted for inflation, that works out to around $11,000 to $13,000 in today's money, which is an absolute bargain for an aircraft when you look at the price of even entry-level things today. But posting adverts in magazines wasn't all. Igor Bensens also knew that if the B-8 was to be a true success, he had to do more to bring it to public attention. This he did with a B-8M called the Spirit of Kitty Hawk, which he used to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight by retracing it in the aircraft. He also used the same gyrocopter to set numerous records for autogyros in the 1960s, including setting an average speed of 117 km an hour over a 3-kilometer closed circuit, and a maximum altitude record of 2,217 meters without a payload. Igor would later donate this particular B-8M to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Igor Bensens' efforts were, of course, a success, and they helped to make the B-8M the best-selling autogyro design in history. Over the years, Bensen constructed and sold around 1,500 completed B-8Ms and at least 4,000 assembly kits. Now, because of the nature of kit-built machines, it's almost impossible to say how many have been built. Most estimates seem to range between 5,000 to 12,000, which is a fairly wide variance. But part of this could be on account of the fact that there were many sub-variants of the B-8M. It is almost impossible to overstate how popular the B-8M became in the 1960s and 70s. In an era where you could pretty much DIY anything that you could find in a magazine, a DIY rotorcraft made for an irresistible project for the aeronautically inclined and the ground-averse. Naturally, the B-8 gradually evolved into a few different variants. You had the B-8V, which swapped the McCulloch engine for a 64 horsepower Volkswagen model. Various B-8Ms began to include a small 1 horsepower engine, which was used to spin up the rotor blades before takeoff, which significantly reduced the takeoff distance. This engine was later increased in power, and along with other refinements, some models of the B-8M became known as the Superbug. Then you had the B-8MH, with the H standing for hover gyro. Now this model did not enter into commercial production, but it's still worth a mention. This was a twin coaxial rotor design, which gave the B-8 the capability to hover. Now, I've read through a few conflicting sources, so please let me know in the comments if you believe otherwise here, but it appears that the lower set of rotors was powered and the upper set merely auto-rotated, so they were unpowered. The powered rotors were driven by a 110 horsepower water-cooled outboard engine, and the pusher propeller was driven by a much smaller 14 horsepower air-cooled go-kart engine. Details on it are sparse, but it was first demonstrated in the 1970s. Hover height was controlled by engine throttle, rather than a collective control that changes the rotor blade pitch angle. And because of this, it was quite difficult to control, and even Bensen found it to be a challenging machine to handle. Now, aside from the abortive hover variant, there were also some aquatic versions of the B-8. This included the B-8W Hydroglider and the B-8B Hydro Boat. These were both unpowered versions designed to be towed behind a boat, and there is in fact some fantastic footage of the Hydro Boat in action. And then you also have the B-8MW Gyrocopter, which is basically a standard B-8M but with floats. Collectively, all the commercial models represent Igor Bensens' desire to bring recreational flying to the masses at an affordable price point. And as mentioned before, the B-8M was the most successful by far. Although Bensen stopped production in 1987, the simplicity of the design, and the powers of the internet, means that you can still theoretically build one today. You would of course need to source a different set of rotors and a few other related key components that were originally supplied by Bensen, which are now out of production. Unsurprisingly, because of this, a good number of B-8s survive today, many in museums, but an unknown number are still flying in the hands of various autogyro enthusiasts. I have always been fascinated by Igor Bensens' rotorcraft, as I feel like they are some of the less appreciated of their class. I also just really love the idea of building your own little flying machine in a shed. It's brilliant, it's accessible aviation for the common people. And I'm hoping to produce a much longer video that explores the history of Igor Bensen and his other interesting designs in a bit more detail in the not too distant future. But that will be a story for another day.